Behind the legendary kings and conquerors of history, there are stories far darker than any fiction. These are the stories of the women who had to navigate a world built by men for men. A world of shocking violence and political betrayal. They were princesses and queens, used as bargaining chips in alliances, their bodies and children treated as little more than pieces in a game for absolute power. But some of them learned the rules of this brutal game. They learned to be more cunning and more ruthless than the men who tried to control them. This is the story of one of those women, a queen whose life has been twisted into a shocking story of abuse by her own father. It is the story of a princess passed from one king to another, who watched her children get murdered right in front of her, and who was left with absolutely nothing. But from those ashes, she would rise to become not just a survivor, but a goddess. This is the story of Arsinoe II, a queen of Egypt, and it is a chilling reminder that the path to power is often paved with trauma. Her name was Arsinoe, and the story whispered about her in the darkest corners of the internet is one of almost unimaginable horror. A princess violated by her own father the king, and forced into a marriage with him to secure his dynasty. It is a story so violent, it feels like it was ripped from some depraved fantasy. But what if the documented truth of her life, a life of forced marriages, political assassinations, and the slaughter of her own children, is just as terrifying? How did a woman who endured so much not only survive, but claw her way to become one of the most powerful figures of the ancient world? To understand Arsinoe, you have to understand the world she was born into. This was not a time of peace and stability, it was a world forged in ambition and drenched in blood. In 323 before Christ, Alexander the Great, the man who had conquered the known world, died suddenly in Babylon. He left no clear heir, just a single chilling instruction for who should inherit his vast empire, to the strongest. What came next was 50 years of non-stop savage war. Alexander's most brilliant and ruthless generals, known as the dynastic or the successors, immediately turned on each other. They carved up his empire like a carcass, each man desperate to grab the biggest piece. Alliances were made and broken in the same breath. Friends became deadly enemies. Overnight, this was the age of the god king, where military might was the only law, and mercy was a fatal mistake. Arsinoe was born right into this chaos, around 316 before Christ. Her father was one of the most successful of these successors, Ptolemy I, a sharp and pragmatic general who had been one of Alexander's trusted childhood friends. While other generals fought over the whole empire, Ptolemy made a strategic move. He seized the wealthiest and most ancient land of all, Egypt. He declared himself pharaoh, and started a new Greek dynasty that would rule the Nile for the next 300 years. Ptolemy was a shrewd ruler. He built a brilliant capital at Alexandria, home to the legendary library and lighthouse. But he was also a product of his violent world. He ruled with an iron fist, his power won and held by the sword. For his children, this meant their lives were never their own, they were tools to be used in the great game of power. For his daughters like Arsinoe, their value was measured by one thing, their ability to secure a powerful marriage. From the moment she was born, Arsinoe was a political asset, a bargaining chip to be played when the time was right. Her childhood in the rich but dangerous court of Alexandria was not a fairy tale, it was a training ground where she learned that power, not love, was the only thing that mattered. As Arsinoe became a young woman, her father's strategic eye turned to her. She was a valuable piece on the chessboard of kingdoms. Her husband would not be someone she chose, or someone who loved her, he would be a man whose alliance her father desperately needed. That man was Lysimachus, another of Alexander's old bodyguards, who had clawed his way to a massive kingdom of his own. Lysimachus was already an old man, well into his 60s. Arsinoe was just a teenager, probably no older than 16. He was a hardened warlord, famous for his bad temper and battle scars. The marriage was a classic political move, meant to forge an alliance between Ptolemy's Egypt and Lysimachus' kingdom. For Arsinoe, it meant being shipped off to a foreign land, to the court of a man old enough to be her grandfather, a man who only cared about the power she brought him. She played her part as queen, and gave Lysimachus 3 sons. But the court she walked into was a viper's nest, Lysimachus already had an heir from a previous marriage, a popular and capable son named Agathocles. To make things even more complicated, Agathocles was married to Arsinoe's own half-sister, Lysandra. This created an instant, intense rivalry. Arsinoe knew that as long as Agathocles was alive, her own sons had no shot at the throne. They would live and die as irrelevant princes in the cutthroat world of these royal courts. This was not just about ambition, it was about survival. When a king died, the fight for power was a blood sport, and the losers were almost always executed. Arsinoe had to secure her son's future, and that meant Agathocles had to go. Ancient historians paint a chilling picture of what she did next. Using her influence over her aging husband, Arsinoe allegedly began to poison Lysimachus' mind against his own son. She whispered accusations that Agathocles was plotting to overthrow him, playing on the old king's paranoia. It worked. Convinced his son was a traitor, Lysimachus had Agathocles arrested and executed. It was a stunningly ruthless move. Arsinoe, the teenage bride sent as a pawn, had learned the game with terrifying speed. She identified the biggest threat to her and her children, and engineered his destruction. She had cleared the path for her son to become king. But this single act of brutal ambition would have devastating consequences. The murder of the popular prince sent shock waves through the kingdom, destabilizing her husband's rule. Arsinoe had won the battle, but in doing so, she helped light a fire that would burn her entire world down. It is at this point in her story, the shift from a princess pawn to a ruthless operator, that a really disturbing narrative has taken hold. In modern retellings, this story tries to explain her cold, calculating nature by pointing to an origin of unimaginable trauma. The allegation is this, that before she was ever married off to Lysimachus, Arsinoe was abused and raped by her own father Ptolemy I, maybe even forced into a secret marriage with him. According to these sensational accounts, this was not just the sick act of one man, but a twisted kind of state policy. The theory goes that Ptolemy, trying to solidify his new dynasty, adopted the ancient Egyptian pharaonic practice of incestuous marriage. The union of a brother and sister, or even father and daughter, was seen by Egyptians as sacred. By forcing his daughter into a relationship like this, Ptolemy would have been trying to elevate his family to the status of living gods. In this version of the story, Arsinoe's childhood was a living hell. The trauma, it is argued, is what made her who she was: brilliant, morally flexible, and completely unsentimental. It would explain her capacity for ruthlessness, like destroying Agathocles. It turns her from a simple villain into a tragic anti-heroine. This story is powerful, it is dramatic, and it gives a neat psychological reason for a complex historical figure. But it is critical to state that this narrative, as compelling as it is, just is not supported by the historical record. Not a single reputable ancient historian, not Plutarch, not Pausanias, nobody ever mentions or even hints at any kind of abuse or marriage between Arsinoe and her father Ptolemy. The historical consensus is that her first marriage was to Lysimachus. The story of her abuse seems to be a modern invention, a sensational myth that has spread online, where drama often beats fact. Documented practice of sibling marriage in her family, with her own early life, created a backstory that is shocking but ultimately not true. While the Ptolemies did later embrace sibling marriage, the claim that it started with her and her father is not based on evidence. So we are left with a conflict, a gripping story that defines her in popular culture, and a historical record that says nothing about it. But the absence of this specific horror does not mean her life was not traumatic. The real, documented events of her life are on their own, a testament to a brutal existence. The true story of her suffering was about to begin, and it would be just as devastating as any myth. Arsinoe's takedown of Agathocles backfired spectacularly. The murder of the heir plunged Lysimachus' kingdom into chaos and civil war. Seleucus, another of the original successors, saw his chance. He invaded, and at the Battle of Corupedium in 281 before Christ, the 80-year-old Lysimachus was killed in a single day. Arsinoe's world collapsed. She was no longer a queen, she was the widow of a defeated king. She fled with her 3 sons to the city of Cassandria. She was in a desperate spot, A single woman with royal children, in a world where men with armies made all the rules. She was a target. Then a new player entered her life, a man who was both her salvation and her damnation. His name was Ptolemy Ceraunus, and he was her own half-brother. Ceraunus was an outcast, a man with huge ambition and a reputation for being a snake. He had been living in exile, but had just managed to assassinate Seleucus and grab the throne of Macedonia for himself. Now he turned his attention to Arsinoe. She controlled a powerful city, and more importantly, she had legitimate heirs. Ceraunus made her an offer that was both a rescue and a threat. He would marry her. A union between them would strengthen his shaky claim to the throne. He swore he would adopt her sons and treat them as his heirs. Arsinoe was not a fool. She knew her half-brother was dangerous. But what choice did she have? Refuse him, and she would be his enemy. He had an army. She was trapped. She agreed to the marriage, but only if he swore the oath in a sacred temple. She was trying to bind a man who had no honor. The wedding happened, and Ceraunus was welcomed into the city. For a brief moment, it might have looked like Arsinoe had navigated another crisis. She was queen again, her sons were safe. But it was all an illusion. Ceraunus had no intention of keeping his word. He did not want rivals, he wanted absolute power. As soon as he controlled the city, he showed his true colors. In an act of shocking brutality, Ceraunus had Arsinoe's 2 younger sons murdered. Some sources say they were cut down in her arms as she tried to shield them. Her eldest son managed to escape. But Arsinoe's world was destroyed all over again. She had schemed to put her children on a throne, and instead, she led them to their killer. Stripped of her sons, her city, and her dignity, Arsinoe was thrown out, a queen with nothing left to lose, a broken woman. Arsinoe fled to the island of Samothrace, seeking sanctuary. But she was not the type to give in to despair. Her grief was a fire, and it forged a new, harder resolve. She had lost her sons, her husband, and her kingdom. She had been betrayed by her own family. She would not be a victim again. There was only one place left to go, one last power she could turn to, her family in Egypt. She returned to Alexandria, the city of her birth, and threw herself on the mercy of her full brother, Ptolemy II, who was now pharaoh. The Egypt she came back to was wealthy and powerful, the most stable of all the kingdoms. But its court was tense. Ptolemy II was already married to another Arsinoe. Their marriage had produced heirs and secured alliances. But the arrival of his older sister, a woman famous throughout the Greek world for her intelligence, ambition, and tragic story, changed everything. Arsinoe II was no longer the teenage girl who had been shipped off to marry an old king. She was now a woman in her 30s, hardened by years of political games, loss, and betrayal. She saw the situation in her brother's court, not as someone begging for help, but as an expert. She quickly sized up the power dynamics and saw her opening. Her brother's wife, Arsinoe I, was in her way. And just like she had dealt with Agathocles years ago, she moved to eliminate the threat. Soon enough, rumors of a conspiracy started swirling around Arsinoe I. She was accused of plotting to kill her husband. Was the plot real, or was it a brilliant setup orchestrated by Arsinoe II? We will never know for sure. But given her history, many historians believe Arsinoe II was the one pulling the strings. Either way, the result was the same. Arsinoe I was found guilty and exiled to the south of Egypt. With her rival gone, the path was clear. But Arsinoe was not just aiming to be the king's favorite sister. She was aiming for the very top. She proposed something that was both shocking and revolutionary. She would not just advise her brother, she would marry him. The proposal was scandalous to the Greeks, who were the ruling class in Egypt. The marriage of a full brother and sister was incest, a major taboo. It was something out of dark myths, not something practiced by civilized rulers. The court was stunned, and the rest of the Greek world was horrified. But Arsinoe was playing a different game with a different set of rules. She understood that while the Greeks might be shocked, the native Egyptians, who were the vast majority of their subjects, would see it very differently. For thousands of years, the pharaohs of Egypt had married their sisters to keep their divine bloodline pure. The most revered gods in Egypt, Isis and Osiris, were both brother and sister, husband and wife. By marrying her brother, Arsinoe was making a powerful political and religious statement. She was signaling that she and Ptolemy were not just Greek kings, they were true pharaohs, embracing the sacred traditions of the land they ruled. It was a brilliant move to legitimize their dynasty in the eyes of the Egyptian people. Ptolemy II, a sharp operator himself, saw the genius in it. He agreed. He married his sister Arsinoe, and together they took on a new royal title, Philadelphoi, which means brother and sister loving in Greek. This was the start of Arsinoe's real rise to power. She was not just a queen consort, a pretty face next to the king. She became a co-ruler in everything but name. Her portrait appeared alongside her brother's on coins, a huge honor for a queen back then. She played an active role in running the kingdom, especially in foreign policy. She was even deified in her own lifetime, worshipped as a living goddess. Cities were named after her. She had transformed herself from a powerless pawn into a divine ruler. The woman who had been trafficked, widowed, and betrayed, who had watched her children die, now stood as an equal beside the most powerful king in the region. She had not just survived the game, she had rewritten the rules. The story of Arsinoe is an incredible testament to the power of women who were systematically underestimated. If you find these hidden histories of formidable queens as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You will not want to miss our next dive into the dramatic lives that shaped our world. Arsinoe II did not have any more children. Her marriage to her brother was not about heirs, it was about power. For about a decade, she and Ptolemy II ruled Egypt together, overseeing a period of incredible prosperity and cultural growth. Then, around 270 before Christ, Arsinoe died. But her death did not diminish her power. In fact, it cemented it. Ptolemy II, who seems to have genuinely loved and admired his sister, launched an amazing campaign to make her immortal. He ramped up the divine cult that had already started, making sure Arsinoe would be worshipped as a full-fledged goddess across the entire kingdom. Her image, often shown holding a double cornucopia symbolizing wealth, became one of the most lasting symbols of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She was so revered that even decades after her death, official documents were still dated by her time as a goddess. Her greatest and most controversial legacy, though, was making sibling marriage the norm. The precedent she set with Ptolemy II became standard practice for their family for the next 250 years. Ptolemaic princes would marry their sisters. This practice kept the royal bloodline pure and kept outsiders from making claims on the throne. Critically, it created a family line of extremely powerful queens. The famous Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemaic rulers, was a direct result of the system Arsinoe II had started. Cleopatra, just like Arsinoe, married her younger brother and ruled as a living goddess, a proof of the power structure her family member had built. So who was Arsinoe II? Was she the victim of the terrible abuse that modern stories claim? The historical proof for that is weak. Or was she the woman from the ancient writings, a smart political player, shaped by betrayal and loss? The truth is, she was probably a deep mix of both victim and winner. She was without a doubt a product of a harsh male-controlled world that treated women like property. She went through the real, recorded pains of a forced marriage, court plots, and the unbelievable pain of seeing her children killed. These things did not break her, they made her stronger. Arsinoe learned the bloody rules of the power game from a young age. She learned that feelings were a weakness, and that survival needed being clever and hard. She used those lessons to climb out of the bottom and reach a level of power no Greek queen had ever known. By marrying her brother, she broke centuries of Greek rules and created a new idea of female leadership, the sister queen, the shared ruler, the living goddess. Her story is a scary and interesting story of change. It is the story of how a small player on the board became the hand that moves the pieces. Whether she was pushed by the memory of a lie or the wounds of a real-life pain, Arsinoe II climbed her way to the top and proved that even in a world made to break her, a woman with a strong will could find a way to become a god.